following is a look back down a long and weathered road. Certain details and certain names have been omitted or changed for the sake of the people around during these times. Timelines blur in memories, and for that I am sure that I will get some timelines mixed up. Shit happens though, and I'm not too concerned about it. The meat of the memories is intact, and that's what matters. This has been a long time coming. I often find myself slipping into these thoughts or images of what it would be like to sit across from myself from those younger days. What would we say? How I feel? You ever do that? It's weird, but it happens to me all the time, and I'm on my own about 90% of the time. It's scary what the mind will project when you're alone. I imagine sitting across from myself from the summer that I proposed. I've thought about this scenario more times than I should admit. For the first several years of imagining this conversation, I was angry, and all I wanted to do was harm the past me. I wanted to lash out. It took some time, but eventually the conversation evolved from being a violent nightmare to what it's been for about the past 6 years. There's no more violence, there's no lashing out, and there's no nightmare. We're sitting at a dining room table that's lit by a light that's hanging above us. And there's another light source, but it's got no origin. And the rest of our setting is unlit, and it feels like an empty void. We're alone in this vast darkness at a small square table, and the past me is sitting anxious and curious. Of all the lessons in movies, books, TV shows, the one that's going through my past me's mind is that time travel paradoxes, they're never good. Something's got to be wrong. And the past me is leaning back in his chair, staring at the current me, but remaining silent. He knows he isn't supposed to say anything and break the silence. I'm sitting across from him, and my elbows are on the table, and my face is cradled in my hands. I can't make eye contact, and I'm afraid of looking myself in the eyes. I focus on the black that's all around us, the emptiness that shockingly feels comforting to me. I try to look up, shifting my body in my chair to allow the silence to linger just a little longer. And the past me can feel the curiosity fading into confusion. The silence, it weighs too much on him, but he doesn't care about the how. That's got no relevance to him. There's only one question that matters, and the answer holds all that is true to this moment. The answer that has the power to push the darkness away. It will reveal all, and it will make this impossible and uncomfortable moment end. But he knows that he can't be the first one to speak. The silence is perfect. It holds all the space that I need to say what I need to say. Its patience is inspiring, and it holds an authority around us. I focus on my breathing. I can hear my lungs inflate and deflate with every slow and controlled breath that I take. I know what I need to say. I know that I need to say it immediately. But first, I have to be able to look myself in the eyes. But I am afraid. We sit, and I can hear him shifting, and I can hear his breathing increasing. There's a new intensity to it. It's not fast, but it's deliberate and it's barely controlled. I rub my hand or my face in my hands, and I run my left hand through my hair several times because it's just one of my many anxious tics. I focus on the sounds that my fingers make as they shuffle through the strands of hair that are on my head. I am afraid, but I take a long and deep breath. I have to speak. I finally look up and I slowly exhale. I refuse to blink. The darkness feels as though it's growing, and the light isn't going out. It's maintained its luminescence, but the darkness is growing, and the light is not. The chair across from me is empty. I am alone. I can feel the urge to cry, but no tear runs down my face. I'm sorry. I stopped believing in your God when I was 7 years old. I never believed in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, or any of the childhood mythical figures. I wasn't raised to believe in any of that. I was raised to believe in God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. It was ingrained in me from the beginning of my life that everything I did in life was scrutinized and judged by those three. If I didn't believe in them, I was going to burn and suffer for an eternity because doubt and disbelief are the ultimate sins. I could go out and slaughter people in the most heinous ways, but if I accepted Jesus into my heart, all of my transgressions would be forgiven, and I would be admitted into heaven after I died. But if I made it a point to be a good person, a loving person, who put others before me, took a back seat to others' needs and wants, lived a life of kindness and positivity, and did not believe in Jesus, I would be punished and sentenced to pain and torture. This is how the church explained it to the masses, and my family being a part of the masses, it was how they were conditioned to view and process their beliefs. They in turn did what every parent is supposed to do. They pass the knowledge that they were taught and they give it to their children. I hold no ill will to my mom and dad for this. They were messengers for their faith, and their faith had been corrupted by egotistical, fear-mongering leaders in the church. My parents were lied to. My family was lied to. And my family was always involved in the church. My mom was in the choir, my dad was an usher sometimes, and my aunt and uncle were youth pastors. And my brother, he was part of the youth group and the drama group. God was a part of our lives, day in and day out. There are times that I'm still shocked that my brother and I were even allowed to go to public school. And I also did my part being involved with the church. I did the Christmas programs and the children's choir. I even did a couple of plays at one point with my brother and his drama group. To this day, I'm still very proud of one of those plays. But as I said earlier, I quit believing in your God when I was 7 years old. My parents knew from the moment that I was born that I was going to be a troublemaker. The rebellious one, the one to go against the grain. They had gotten lucky with my brother, even though he made his fair share of mistakes when he was young. But my brother quickly learned from his mistakes and, of course, corrected himself. I have never had that ability. You could argue that I am insane because I fall into my same fucked up routines and expect different results. And I'll be the first to admit I can be an idiot. I was attracted to science from a very early age. specifically science involving dinosaurs and the prehistoric world. My parents gave me books about dinosaurs, some of which I still have. And I went everywhere with those books. I reread them so many times that I did end up putting some decent wear and tear on the bindings. I was obsessed. If there were dinosaurs, I wanted to see it and I wanted to read it, including Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton when I was in second grade. My poor parents, they just figured that it was a dinosaur book. What could the harm be? But my obsession with dinosaurs and the prehistoric world are what directly led me to calling it a day on faith. My faith. I can tell you that I never actually had faith, or at least the active kind. I believed in God and Jesus because that's what I was told to do. My whole family did, and since I was a part of the family, it's what I did as well. But did I actually practice that faith? Pray sincerely? No, not once. Everything I did in the name of God before I was 7, I did purely because I saw others around me doing it, and I figured that I was expected to do the same. I remember at one point, all of us kids were taken to one of the kids' classrooms, which was on the second floor of the church, to learn how to speak in tongues. One by one, we were taken aside by the teacher, and she explained to us the process of letting the Holy Spirit flow through us and how once it did, we would speak in tongues. We were taken one by one into a makeshift room in the classroom. Large curtains had been draped into a small little rectangular shape, and inside the small curtain room, there were 2 chairs, one for the kid, one for the adult. It came to be my turn, and the teacher closed the curtain behind me, and when I stepped into the room, she sat down and she told me that I should be excited. All I remember thinking was, this feels weird and uncomfortable. And then just so that I could leave, just so I could get it over with, I faked it. I made silly sounds with my eyes closed, and I hoped that it would be good enough for the lady. I don't think she bought my act, but she must not have wanted to try more with me because she said that I did well and sent me on my way. So later, I was in Sunday school, learning about Noah and his ark. We were given these coloring sheets with Noah and the animals on them while the teacher taught us the story. I still shake my head how she tried making mass genocide by drowning and destruction seem child-friendly. She made it a point to briefly speak on the death toll and focus on just how much water covered everything. So I get my coloring sheet, and there was Noah, big beard, holding his staff, while admiring lions, giraffes, elephants, snakes, etc., all walking aboard the ark 2 by 2. So I raise my hand, still looking at the sheet. Yes, Dustin, do you have a question? She asked. These animals didn't exist yet. I spoke with confidence because I had learned about prehistoric animals in my dino books. I had learned about the evolution of our current wildlife, and if you go by science and the actual timeline of our planet, these specific animals at that time were quite a bit different. We had a quick debate, and then she looked me in the eye, and this I will never forget. She told me, you aren't supposed to question the Bible, Dustin. Now, I have always been one to question. And if you tell me to not bother questioning something, I am immediately going to scrutinize it. If I am told not to question something, my instinct has always told me that it must be something bad. There must be something there that someone doesn't want known. It's untrustworthy to me, and that is never a good thing. My instinct kicked in, and my mind broke it down like this. If I am not allowed to question the Bible, then the Bible can't be trusted because it must not be all good. And if it's not all good, like everyone says, then it must be bad. And if the Bible is bad and it's the Word of God, then God must be bad. I can't trust God. 7 years old, sitting in Sunday school, I put on a smile and colored that stupid picture, making the decision that if I can't trust God, then I won't believe in Him. But there was something new that stirred in me. I shouldn't say something new. I should say something frightening. I didn't believe in the holier than thou liar in the sky anymore. But my entire family did. And I had already learned that non believers were to be pitied. They were corrupted by the devil, and you had to be careful around them. Anything secular could be damaging to your faith. But I was 7, and suddenly believing that if I told my family that I didn't believe in God anymore, I would be an outcast, kicked out of the family, unloved, and dead to them. I was terrified and decided that to avoid all of that, I would pretend. I was good at pretending. I played pretend all the time. I would just tweak it so that instead of it being a game, it would be my life. So I made my character, and for the next several years, I put on a little show. I should note, those feelings of fear of my family kicking me out and banishing me were completely unwarranted. My family is the kind of family who actually holds that title sacred. Family's everything. It's above differences. My family, as irritating as we all can get with each other from time to time, is actually pretty strong and very supportive and very loving. I get it. I'm a bit biased. But I'm not kidding you when I tell you that my family is the true definition of that word. Family's sacred, and mine holds that they hold true to that. Differences be damned. Differences are petty things that don't change anything. And this was something that I had to realize over time because my perception was clouded from such an early age due to the conditioning at the hands of the leadership in the church, God's chosen to speak His words. My Christian character was pretty good. I even went method and got baptized. Ironically, it was shortly after I quit believing. The church we attended had a rule on baptism. You can laugh at that. I do. To be eligible for baptism, you had to be a certain age. Before that age, I guess the church just crossed their fingers that if you died before being baptized, God would pity your young age enough to let you into heaven. Even though, according to their God, anyone at any time can be baptized. I'll give you one good guess. One good guess about the age. Go. Yep. You guessed it. 7. You had to be 7 years old to be eligible to be bathed in the glory of God, to be washed of your sins and come out anew. I was baptized a week or two after I quit believing in God, but it was necessary for my character to do it. I had to sell the act. And what better way to sell it than to be a part of one of Christianity's biggest rituals? I almost messed it up, though. I had to do a class with the pastor who had performed the baptism. It was my parents and I in the room with a few other people, adults, who were getting baptized alongside me. We were told the process, what to wear, and what to say before and after the dunk. My parents were so proud that I was making this huge decision to show my dedication to faith. Truthfully, truthfully. I just wanted to see the dunk tank for myself and sell the character. The more people who saw and believed the character, the better. There were areas of the church we attended that I always wanted to see, but never knew how to get to them. I always had to figure it out. I knew the offices and hallways because my uncle's office was there. I knew how to get backstage in the main hall, and I had been backstage several times for the youth group and Sunday school sermons. But I really wanted to know how to get to the dunk tank, and I wanted to see it for myself. So, if you stood in the main auditorium of the church and faced the stage, you would have seen a second level that stood just over the stage. There were 2 monitors mounted on either side of the second level, and in the middle is a small curtain, and it's behind that curtain where the dunk tank is. And when someone is being baptized, the curtain opened to reveal the tank. It's see-through so that everyone can see you in the water. And it was small in width, but deeper than you'd expect. And there were 2 hidden staircases that led directly into and out of the tank. And the tank is at the front of a small room where the pastor stood and spoke to the congregation about the history of baptism and what the decision to be baptized means. He would give you the signal to walk towards him, and as you sat in the water, he asked your name and if you would accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior into your heart. He would ask what led you to want to be baptized, which is a nice way of asking how bad you fucked up and are looking for atonement. You would answer, and then he would speak the words. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, be baptized in the glory of God and come out new and washed of your sins. Or something along those lines. So this is where I almost fucked up my character. Luckily, I was 7, and 7-year-old kids saying goofy things is just common. I chalked my sins up to not cleaning my room enough. I was dunked, held for a second, and then was brought back up. I wiped the water from my face and was asked what I planned to do now that I was washed in God's glory. This is where you'd expect to celebrate your cleanliness and profess your dedication to loving God and Jesus. And I said I was just going to go clean my room. The congregation laughed and applauded, perceiving my answers as a child's metaphor for choosing to do the right thing. I dried off, changed clothes, and my family and I celebrated that day by going to a local bakery for donuts and pastries. And that kind of became my norm, at least until I hit the good old cliche age of 13. But that comes later. There were a few moments in my youth that I remember thinking that I wasn't pulling off my acting character as well. There were several factors all leading to that, but there was one time in particular that really stuck with me for the longest time. To most, it would be nothing to blink an eye at, but to me, there was a lot of weight to it. I was still young. I can't remember exactly how old I was. It had to be 8 or so. My brother was still home. He moved to Minneapolis shortly after he graduated high school, and it was just some normal kind of day. The 3 of us were in the car. My brother was in the front seat and my mom was driving. They were having a deep conversation about ministry and God, and how my brother was incredible at ministering to people. Ones he knew and the ones that he didn't. It never made a difference to my brother. He's just incredible at speaking to people. Growing up in my brother's shadow was something that just kind of inadvertently happened. There was never anything done intentionally, and my parents certainly never consciously made it clear that they wished that I was more like my brother. My brother was the good kid. He had made mistakes in his youth, but he learned from them as fast as he made them, and he didn't repeat those mistakes. He was school and street smart. He was in drama, and when we went to his plays, he was excellent. He played football. He excelled at everything he did, and most importantly, he was a devout believer. He stood firm on his beliefs, regardless of the surroundings. He went to public school and obviously had to deal with people teasing him over his faith, or at least trying to rattle him, but he stood firm. He was the ideal son. And then there was me. I was constantly getting in trouble. I was loud, obnoxious, reckless. Definitely didn't excel at school, and certainly didn't excel at anything involving faith. When I was at school, I just never spoke about God. If God was brought up, I'd ignore it and bring up something different. I wanted to be a part of and know more about the secular world. It seemed more engaging, interesting, and most importantly, free. Secular people just seemed to be happier. They got to experience more. I desperately wanted to fit in. I remember hearing about shows or movies that kids at school were talking about that they were allowed to watch, and so I would lie just to be a part of the conversation and claim that I had seen the same thing, knowing full well that there wasn't a chance in hell I would ever be allowed to watch that. But I also wanted to fit in at home, and I couldn't let in that I thought Christian stuff was boring, uninteresting, and stifling. But I had my limits. I felt that I was already putting more work for this character than I wanted to. But I was dedicated to not letting my family down, at least immediately. I could hear the conversation in the front seat while I thought about movies and shows that I wanted to see. I thought about how fun the reckless games my friends and I played on the playground at school were. I wanted to share that stuff, but knew that none of it stood a chance against the godly conversation that was happening. And so, the first time that I can remember consciously riding the coattails of my brother, but with the slightest spin on it to make it sound like my own, I interjected. I ministered to a kid at school. He let me tell him all about how awesome God is, and I told him that he had to accept Jesus into his heart so that he could be saved. And I remember my mom and brother both being thrilled to hear my fib. They were proud of me, and it felt good because I fit in. Eventually, and quite quickly, my brother would move to Minneapolis to join a traveling drama group that toured the country, performing sketches for churches to minister and preach the word in a fresh, new, and exciting way. As sad as I was to see my big brother leave, I couldn't help but feel a little sense of relief because I had this silly notion that I wouldn't have to compete with him anymore. Little did I know or expect that my brother's time in that group would be harder to compete with than when he was at home. From the ages of 7 to 13, I did a fairly decent job of lying to my entire family. I still went to church almost every Sunday with my parents. I still participated in the youth stuff, went on a week-long Bible camp, did the vacation Bible school. I put on a decent show of being a good little Christian kid. But as I was getting older, I was getting burned out on all of it. So I started to slowly drift away from it. Instead of going to both the morning and evening services at church on Sundays, I would only go to the morning one. Instead of following my brother's footsteps in the youth group, I just sat back like most of the other kids. I just didn't get involved. During all of this, I was focusing a lot of energy in making sure to get as much exposure as I could to secular things. I'd stay up late to watch movies on cable, and I would pretend to be sick so I could stay home from school so that I could watch SNL 90s SNL reruns, movies, and other comedy shows that were on Comedy Central. And my parents got more relaxed with movies, except for R-rated, which they felt I wasn't quite ready for. But they let me watch a lot, as long as it didn't deal too much with magic and maintained a reasonable PG-13 rating. I'm pretty sure that somewhere in those years, my parents caught on and knew that I had at least lost some interest in my Christian duties and cares. Fortunately, if they were catching on, they didn't become overbearing or try even harder to get me to invest more of myself into church and faith. They really let me be me, with some boundaries. I remember one year my brother's tour group was in town, and they came quite often, and when they came, I really had to put on the good little Christian character of mine because, didn't want to bring shame to the family. We went to one of their performances, and at the end of it, they brought families to the front to pray over them. Being that my brother was the one calling for the families to come forward, I knew that we were obligated to make it to the front. So my mom, dad, and I went up front. We made a little family circle, my parents holding on to me, and I'll always remember the grip that my dad had on me. He had never gripped me so tightly and lovingly. Let me rephrase. I could tell that just through his grip, he was silently telling me that he had my back. He was there, and he wasn't ever going anywhere. Being that my dad and I used to butt heads more times than not in my youthful years, having that sense was pretty awesome. I didn't care that it was in a place that I had no trust in. The tour group they prayed and they ministered. And the feeling in the church was heavy as families burst into tears over the somber music that's always played during what is supposed to be a very deep spiritual moment. When they were done with the prayer, everyone was released to go back to our seats. My mom hugged me, and she told me that she loved me. And then my dad hugged me as if it was the last hug that we would ever share. It wasn't. My dad's hugs are pretty incredible. But then he kissed me on my head. And when I looked in his eyes, he was crying. And I just had a strange feeling that even though he and I would probably go through some more hard times, we would be all right. It's that moment that makes me believe that they were onto my separation from faith. And it should have been that moment that made me feel okay enough to be honest with them. But I felt ashamed. More than ever, I felt that if I was honest with them about how I actually felt about God and faith and the whole enchilada, it would devastate my family to a degree that we wouldn't be able to recover from. So I kept it bottled up. And as far as the shame, I bottled that up too. My brother would call often and even made it home for the holidays a bunch of times. I loved the visits and the phone calls. Well, at least most of them. There would be a few phone calls that didn't go well between us, but shit happens. But it was during one of those phone calls that I spoke my truth to my brother. I don't remember exactly how the conversation started or even what I said exactly. But what I do know is that my brother's reaction was my fear coming true. I don't remember my brother's words exactly, but I do remember him telling me that I was going to burn in hell for how I was. The conversation ended, and shortly after that, I wept. My parents asked why I was crying and why I was so angry with my brother. I skipped the details because why wouldn't I, after how that conversation went? And I did tell them, though, that he told me I was going to burn in hell. My parents were angry, but they didn't show it. They gave me comfort and didn't ask for any details. Instead, they focused on making sure that I was calming down and that I was okay. According to my brother, he received a pretty harsh reality check from our parents shortly after that. After most phone calls, though, I would have to listen to my parents recap it to each other and then recap it to our friends and family members. My brother was amazing in their eyes, and the only thing that I gave them to brag to our family and friends about was that I had managed to not get in trouble for a little while. What I didn't know was that I had blinded myself. My parents bragged about me. I was just too stupid to hear it or acknowledge it. I had been investing all of my energy into this character, which really just made me feel like shit. But it also began evolving into a sense of being the family black sheep. Instead of talking with my parents about anything, because talking about stuff just wasn't really a thing when I was a kid, I just started acting like I thought a black sheep is supposed to act. I lashed out quicker. I said ridiculous and hurtful things and laughed about it afterwards. And I made my parents' lives harder than they ever should have been. And it could have been avoided had I just spoken up. Post high school and after I was married, I genuinely tried to find faith. I forced myself to read the Bible from front to back, and I forced my perception to be one of pro faith. And when I would catch myself not buying what the book was telling me, I would lie to myself and tell myself that I needed to get over it. Stop questioning it. It didn't last long, though, because as good as I was at lying to my family, I couldn't lie to my wife, and I couldn't lie to myself. Looking back on it, I can comfortably say that I was only diving into it, trying to force myself to believe in it, because I was desperately trying to avoid dealing with something that was very real, very detrimental, and very unforgiving. But that's to come later. I eventually had to come clean. And one afternoon, I joined my mom for a walk around the local lake, and as we were nearing the end of the walk, I finally spoke up. It was just time. I figured that the conversation couldn't go the route of me just being a kid and not knowing what I was talking about or understanding what I thought I was going through. My mom didn't have too many questions. She just had one in particular. Why? I explained to her that it just didn't fit how I process things, and none of it added up for me. She fought back the tears on the drive back to their house, and she didn't talk much. But she did tell me that I owed it to my dad to talk to him about it. I was petrified. She was correct, and I was going to do it, but I was petrified. I remember thinking back on that moment after the big prayer. My dad came home, and as he sat down to relax, I told him. I remember him nodding his head, looking me square in the eyes, and telling me it was okay. He understood that I needed to figure things out for myself, and maybe someday down the road, I will come back to faith. We hugged and then moved on with the afternoon before I went back home. It felt amazing, and all those past feelings of shaming the family suddenly looked so dumb and so pointless. My family didn't banish me. Instead, the head of our household looked me in the eyes, told me it was okay, and embraced me. It's still one of my favorite moments to think about. I tried one more time to figure out faith. I was divorced, completely emotionally broken, desperate, depressed, and living back home with the folks. I went to a few services with my mom, and I made sure to approach it with an open mind. And I remember going to one service with the whole family. My brother and his family were visiting, and we all went together. The pastor asked the congregation if anyone had someone in mind that they would like to send prayers to, and if so, to come to the stage. So I went up. I told the pastor to pray for my ex-wife so that she may find some peace. And after we prayed, I returned to my seat. My brother looked me in the eye, and he told me that I was incredible. I just thought it was the right thing to do. I guess in a way, someone or something may have heard that prayer because she eventually found love. She got remarried and has a child with her husband. Whether she found peace or not, I don't know. But she did find someone to share the rest of her life with, and that kind of constitutes as peace, right? We left that morning, and I knew that Faith and I were still on opposite sides of the fence. But I felt that it was okay because I knew that my family was going to support me. They weren't going to be ashamed of me. So I closed the book on Faith. This time, knowing that I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to put on a charade to appease the family, at least not a charade of faith. I told the fam, and with the pat on the back and smiles, they gave me assurance. It was a good feeling and a pretty good day. That was almost 13 years ago at the time of writing this. Over the years, especially the last couple, I have found myself questioning everything. I'm still processing, and as my dad said, trying to find my own way. But I have been thinking, and I know that it goes against so much on both sides. How fantastic would it be to witness a miracle? Better yet, how magnificent would it be to experience one? I think I'm at a place in my life where I have to hold myself accountable to have an open mind. I claim to be a man of science, and science is always out to prove itself wrong. Science states that if new evidence presents itself which disproves previous theories, hypotheses, etc., then we have to update those findings and theories. We have to be open and ready for previous beliefs to be changed. It's a tough lesson for many on both sides of the fence. So here I am, a comfortable atheist, an atheist from the age of 7 years old who thinks that it would be pretty great to be a part of a miracle. As a man of science, I can't deny the feeling of wanting to be proven wrong. Turning 13 sucked. And not for the goofy reasons you're snickering at. Don't get me wrong. Puberty is a son of a bitch, but that is nothing in comparison with everything else. Random awkward boners are way easier to deal with than depression and suicidal thoughts. I had two moments that gave me joy and peace the year that I turned 13. The rest was all muddled and terrifying because I found myself one day feeling like something was wrong. It wasn't like night and day for me. There was no I went to bed one night totally fine and woke up the next day completely fucked up. It was somewhat gradual, enough that I could tell something bad was coming, but I couldn't figure out what. I ignored it as much as I could, but when the darker thoughts, such as fantasizing about dying, started to creep into my mind, I couldn't ignore it. I also believed that I couldn't talk to anyone about it either. At this age, I was still feeling pretty ashamed for being the black sheep of the family, and I had moments of wanting to talk to them about what was going on in my head, but I couldn't do it because I felt that the only response that I would receive would be something along the lines of, you need to pray, or you need to get over it. I was also afraid that me talking about the dark thoughts in my mind would lead to me having to tell my family that I didn't believe in their God. And that just couldn't happen. So I swallowed those feelings and those thoughts, and I found myself feeling disconnected, angry, and being filled with a hatred that had no reasoning. It just spread through me like a disease. I thought about talking to my closest friends about it, but they all seemed so happy and carefree. They wouldn't get it, and I had no idea how to explain it. I was lost, surrounded by a world that I felt couldn't see me and wouldn't give a shit even if it could. I did what most people end up doing and suffering from. I put on the most convincing of smiles, and when asked how I was doing, I replied with those two most self damning words: I'm fine. Let me clue you in. And think about a few times when you've asked a friend, a family member, or even a customer at your job, when you've asked how they were and they responded with, I'm fine. Really think about how their body language was, their smiles in particular. Did the smile slightly grow? Did the eyes quickly turn away? Maybe there was a head nod and the attention was then directed somewhere else. Those two words never mean something good, and the person saying it needs comfort. They need someone to give them a little support. One night, right around my birthday, my dad made it a point to be together. It was just him and I, and he took me to a local video rental store to rent a couple of movies that he felt I was old enough to watch with him. He was going to cook up a bunch of tasty finger foods for us, and we would have ourselves a father and son kind of night. This night has always meant so much to me. I'll get into it later, but movies are the primary way that I have been able to connect with people. Movies have been the foundation for helping me navigate this life, with some help from music, but not quite yet. My parents always excelled at supporting what my brother and I enjoyed when it came to hobbies and interests. It probably helped that we both love creative arts, especially movies. I still don't know if the movies we rented were the original ones that my dad intended for us to watch, but it doesn't matter because I love them. And I love that my dad is the one who introduced them to me. For the most part, up to my birthday, the only R-rated movies I had seen had been The Matrix, Air Force One, Arlington Road, Schindler's List, and Saving Private Ryan. All the others, I had only ever seen the edited versions on TV. And my dad and I walked around the store, and it didn't take long for my dad to hold up a movie and ask me, "You want to see Arnold get his ass kicked by an alien?" My dad never cursed around me, but he did in that moment, with a giant, eager smile. I loved Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Still do. But I had heard the reputation that Predator had, and there wasn't a chance in hell I was going to pass that up. And I didn't want to seem too eager, so I tried to play it off cool and agreed. My dad decided that we needed a good comedy to balance the bloody violence of Predator. Knowing I was going to get to watch an R-rated comedy was huge. Action movies were typically rated R because of violence, a ton of language, and maybe the occasional brief nudity. But R-rated comedies were always full of sex, nudity, and immature jokes. My dad held up Caddyshack and told me that he felt it was long past due for me to see such a comedy classic. That night was one of my favorite nights ever, and it was a much welcomed and needed mental break from the darkness that was lurking in my mind. My dad gave me a card and a family heirloom that night. It was another piece of evidence that my dad, no matter what our differences, would always be there. It meant the world to me, and to this day, I wish I had told him that sooner. I wish I had word vomited right there and then, but I didn't. And for a few more years, my dad and I were at odds. It didn't take long for my darkness to shun the memory of that night with my dad. I rode that natural high for a little while, but when the depression really kicked in, I lost my hold on that night of happiness and once again put on my mask of smiles and I moved on. I hated myself. I hated everything about me, and I projected that hate to the world around me. All I saw was more things to hate, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw shame and worthlessness, and that scared the shit out of me. There are moments in our lives where we find ourselves in a situation where we understand that we either have to reach out for some help or we're going to die. I was 13 and finding myself in a situation that was drastically nearing that ultimatum. I decided that I would go to youth group one Sunday night. I hadn't been for a couple weeks, and I figured that I would ask the pastor to talk with me. I felt like I had no other options. I wasn't looking for God or even all of the answers. I just needed someone to hear me, to let me speak openly, and to just give me some support and hope. The youth group was set up to be inviting, a safe place for the youth to gather, hang out, play video games, chat, and then fellowship as a unit during the service, which always started with a few songs of praise and worship. And then there'd be the sermon, and then a couple more songs. I arrived on a mission, but figured I still had to put on my show. None of my so-called friends in the youth group took any notice of me when I sat down next to them and tried to talk to them. They were all too sucked into the video games that they were playing. And so I left the area that they were in, and I went looking for the pastor. I found him, and I walked up to him. He said hi to me, and I asked him if I could talk to him about something important. He told me to give him a minute, and then moved on to talk with a couple of the other kids. I may have been a little impatient, but like I said, I was in desperate need to talk. I went up to him again and repeated myself, and he looked me in the eye and he told me, "I don't have time for you right now. Maybe later." And he walked away to go and chat with some of the other kids. I sat in the back that night, and my hatred was amped up. And what had originally been a feeling of untrustworthiness towards God and faith evolved into a pure loathing. I detested the idea of God, faith, and it all stemmed from that moment. At that point in my life, I had convinced myself that I could not trust anyone with how I felt. I had lost trust in faith, but my family stood firm in theirs. I convinced myself that if I could not trust God, I could not trust those that believed in him. The irony there is that I was the one who was putting on the show for everyone, essentially lying to everyone around me as I paraded a false version of me that I believed was what people wanted to see. I had no identity and no one to talk to. I was desperate and lost and had made the decision to ask for help, to trust. Being rejected by the youth pastor didn't just piss me off and hurt me. It validated my mistrust. The lights went down and the praise team took the stage. Everyone stood up to sing along. I stood up, but I didn't join in. Instead, I stood up on my chair, extended my middle finger as high and as far as I could towards the praise team, the pastor, and the congregation. Once I was satisfied with my act of rebellion, I walked out of the auditorium. I couldn't leave the church, though, because my parents were in the main sanctuary, and since church essentially just started, I had to entertain myself for at least 2 hours before church was let out. I decided to just wander around for a couple of hours, inside and outside. I just kept walking around, letting my invigorated disdain fester. The services let out, and I met up with my parents. They looked happy and full of bliss, asking me how the youth group had been. I lied and told them something in the way of, it was fine. That was the last service I attended until after my divorce. I hated the way that I felt when it came to believing that there wasn't anyone there for you. And as a result, starting from my childhood and even currently, I convinced myself that in order to be there for someone, I would have to carry their cross for them, or at least do the best that I could. When I saw a friend going through a rough patch, I would listen to them and let their stress become mine. It took me years to admit that this was a tool I used to make sure that I was accepted by those around me. What it did, however, was help create a larger sense of loneliness. The more I listened to friends, listened to the troubles of others around me, the more I suffocated my own feelings and tried to focus only on theirs. It is very easy to convince yourself that your emotions don't matter when you have no identity. I meant well, and I genuinely wanted to be there for people, to make them feel validated and that they mattered. I just wish that I would have believed that I mattered as well.